Okay, well, good morning, vinyl community. I wanted to do a video on a couple things. Also to make some addendums or corrections to my vinyl tag 2023. Before I get started, two quick things that I think are kind of important. Today is Martin Luther King Day. Happy MLK Day. I'm going to recommend that if you haven't done so, read the letter from Birmingham jail. I'm going to try to make it a habit of reading that every year on MLK Day. It's fairly long, but by God, does it pack a punch. So it's a classic. If you haven't read Letters from Birmingham Jail, honor Dr. King and read it right now. It's not hard to find, but it is absolutely a really important historical document. Secondly, recommendation. If you have Showtime, or you can do like me and quickly get a Showtime subscription and then cancel it. I just finished watching the Ronnie James Dio documentary last night, and it's really cool. And props to Mr. Dio. I was fortunate enough to see Ronnie when he was on the Mob Rules tour. I was 13 years old. It was one of my first rock concerts. And the man is a prince, and he's very much missed. So check out the Ronnie James Dio documentary up on Showtime. So I'm going to start off by giving a quick shout out to Eric over at the Vinyl Rewind channel. He was doing a rundown of his favorites from 2022, and he jogged my memory by picking Piece of Me, the debut album by Lady Ray, a soul singer. And he was absolutely right. I can't believe I forgot. This is definitely my most played album of 2022. Love it, love it, love it. I picked a Depeche Mode album, which I also listen to a lot, but this one I've listened to a ton. This Emerald vinyl pressing, unfortunately, is not great. It's got some skips on it, and I just ordered a second copy because I love this album so much. I want a really good copy. That I hope the second one's better. But man, God, this is just an amazing album. I love it so much. Definitely. So at the end of 22, we got a lot of these kind of best of videos for the year, and so I started creating like Spotify playlist and listen to some of the new albums that I hadn't heard, and some of them were great. Some of them I just didn't thrill me all that much. But one that definitely caught my attention, and I did buy a vinyl copy. Return of the Dream Canteen, one of two Red Hot Chili Peppers albums that came out in 2022. I haven't heard the other one, but I heard this one. It's the first Chili Peppers album I've bought in probably about 2 decades. And yeah, it kicks ass, man. The Peppers are back. If they ever went away, I don't know. I just stopped following them at some point. But man, this new album is just a motherfucker, man. It kicks ass. Highly recommended. Um, so one of the questions in the vinyl tag was an Australian band, and I really screwed up, man. I picked Midnight Oil, who are great, but man, I really screwed up. I should have mentioned Crayon Fields. The name of the band is Crayon Fields. The album, All the Pleasures of the World. I I just listen. I can't even describe their sound other than just hipster music. I don't know how to describe them, but by God, I've listened to this album hundreds of times. There are times where I just put this sucker on repeat and just listen to it all day long. I just absolutely love this album. I just can't recommend it too highly, and they're fairly obscure. This They finally gave this album a vinyl reissue about 2 years ago, so I was happy to get it on vinyl finally. But yeah, I'm gonna say their other two albums aren't nearly as good as this one. But if you've never heard this album, maybe give it a whirl on Spotify or something. I just cannot recommend it too highly. Love that album. So, another great vinyl or music channel, Classic Album Review. Great channel. And he started a new series called Is It Really That Bad? Where he looks at albums that have a bad reputation and asks the question, is it really that bad? And I'm going to shamelessly steal his idea and pick some albums that have a bad reputation, and we'll see what we think. So, starting off, and I'm going to give a link to his channel because I'm flagrantly stealing his idea. But number one, is it really that bad? Rock of the Westies, Elton John, the last of his great string of mid 70s classic albums. Everyone rags on this album. They say this is when things went downhill. I've heard so many people just badmouth this album. I don't get it. Love it. Think it's great. It's kind of like if you know that scene in Tommy where Elton does Pinball Wizard. The whole album sounds like that. It's like definitely, to be blunt, Elton probably is most coked out in the 70s. But I love this album. I don't get why people badmouth it. I think it's stronger than some of the other albums from that period. I truly don't understand why this album gets badmouthed like it does. Is it really that bad? Yeah, it's not good. Passion Play, I would clock this up as a noble failure album. They decided they were going to out-prog what they did on Thick as a Brick. There's some cool passages in here. It just doesn't work. Yeah, it's just this one's not great. And Tall took a big hit. They lost a lot of their audience with this album. Yeah, it could be better. Is it really that bad? Goodbye Cruel World by Elvis Costello and the Attractions. I like it. I think it's a fine album. I have no problem with it. Elvis endlessly badmouths and trashes this album. He's repeatedly, and I know he was going through some personal problems at the time. It was a bleak period for him. It does kind of suffer from like some 80s over synthesizer kind of stuff going on, and Elvis just trashes this album repeatedly. So I don't think it's that bad at all, but the man himself is not happy with this album. Real quick, if you see the CD edition, some of the CD editions have extended tracks, and there's a track called Turning the Town Red. It's a bonus track, which is just it's as good as anything on Imperial Bedroom or whatever. Dynamite track. It shows up as an extended bonus track on the CD edition. Real briefly, that track also appears on this compilation called Out of Our Idiot, which is a really cool compilation of oddballs, B-sides, whatever. I haven't listened to this album in a long time. I really need to listen to it again. But anyway, speaking of 80s chintzy synthesizers and all that, is it really that bad? The last of the golden era echo of the Bunnymen albums. Again, I think it's the band members that really trashed this album. I think they went through 3 or 5 different producers. They could just not finish this album. It dragged on forever. And it sort of has a reputation for being ruined by like too much 80s synth. I don't get that one either. I love this album. It's not the best from that period. There's the albums before it are better, but Lips Like Sugar's on this album, one of their big hits. Yeah, I love this album, but a lot of people trash it. The band members trash it. There you have it. Is it really that bad? No. Tales of Topographic Oceans. It's long. It does kind of drag at parts. It's like, yeah, I think I've said what I need to say. It's kind of long, but it's rewarding at parts. There's some great passages in here. Some of the good stuff is just kind of buried under some kind of tedious passages. But if you're at all into prog, I'd say this is an album you absolutely have to have. But it does kind of have a bad reputation. Tales from Topographic Oceans. Is it really that bad? Pop by U2. Um, it could be better. There's some great tracks on this album. There's some definite dogs on this album. Some tracks that are just but I think maybe the production kind of clobbers some of these songs. It sounds like there's like the opening track Discotheque, just Edge is playing this just killer guitar riff, and but somehow it just doesn't quite pack the punch that it should. I can't quite explain what it is. I think the real problem with this album was U2 was just absolutely monstrously huge after Joshua Tree. And I think people felt like they were too big for their britches, and this album came out, so they just pounced on it. They were just, people were just eager to take U2 down a notch, and they just trashed this album something unmercifully. I would say Last Night on Earth and Wake Up Dead Men are really good tracks. I like pop, but yeah. And speaking of an album that got just unmercifully trashed, is it really that bad? Presence by Led Zeppelin. Now I'm going to get real opinionated. I don't think this album is bad at all. I think this is one of Zeppelin's better albums. I think it's hugely misunderstood. It came out in 77. The UK music press, punk, had taken over the world, and the UK music press was just itching for a fight. And boy, did they just jump all over this album. I know that there was some weird stuff going on. I think Plant was in a wheelchair when they recorded it. They had to finish it real quick in a couple of days. There was something going on where like they rented out a studio and they had to like finish it in a week or something like that. So they're really under the gun. And I think it's what they did was they went back to basics. There's no keyboards on this album, and they were just like, we're gonna go back to basic blues based, balls to the wall hard rock. And I think this is like a back to basics album, and they just knock it out of the park. I love this album. I think it's better than their second album. I think it's probably better than Physical Graffiti. I think it came out, the press pounced on it, and has had a bad reputation ever since. Um, so yeah, I truly feel this is probably one of Zeppelin's stronger albums and went back to basics. I love Presence. I think it's just an amazing album. It gets better every time I listen to it. And also, I haven't been all that thrilled with the Jimmy Page remasters that came out, but for whatever reason, this one sounds really good. I think this one and the first album sounded dynamite on the remasters. So yeah. Now I'm gonna real briefly contrast what happened with the Presence with another album by a really big bloated British band that came out in the summer of punk. Animals by Pink Floyd, another band that the punks hated. The UK music press was ready to really stick it to Floyd when they released their new album in 1977. The album's dark, it's angry, there's lots of social commentary, there's even some Orwell going on in the music, in the lyrics. The music press heard it and they're like, damn, we like the new Floyd album. The UK music press was very kind to this album, and now I'm surprised how many people consider it to be their favorite Floyd. It's not my favorite Floyd album, but increasingly, a lot of people feel like this is their favorite Floyd album. So I think the press has a lot to do with why some albums kind of get a bad reputation and others end up coming out smelling like a rose. So now I'm going to head into kind of heavy rotation stuff I've been listening to. And just real quick, I can bang through these pretty quick. Stormbringer. This is the last album with Richie Blackmore. He wasn't crazy about kind of the more funk direction that the band was going to in the mid 70s. So Richie left after this album. And yeah, it's definitely kind of got some funk and some groove going on it. I love it, man. I think this is a hugely underrated album. Real quick, Of course, we've all heard Surrealistic Pillow a million times. This is a mono copy, and I sometimes feel like maybe people overhype, like, oh man, you gotta hear the mono, and it's really expensive and hard to find, but you gotta. Well, this is a case where the mono mix truly is superior. I This is the second mono copy I've bought. The first one was pretty banged up. I had to pay 25 for this, but it's worth it because damn, the mono of Surrealistic Pillow is really worth hunting down. So next time you're crate digging, if you can find an original mono Surrealistic Pillow, check it out. It sounds fantastic. I've been listening to a lot of Hot Chip, and I really like this album, Bath Full of Ecstasy. I won't go on and on, but if you know about Hot Chip, I think this is maybe one of their better albums. I really like it. I think it's a banger. Hot Chip. And real quick, I wouldn't call this a grail, but I had been looking for a vinyl copy of Hearts and Bones by Paul Simon, kind of an underrated album, the one right before Graceland, and it did not disappoint. A really great, underrated album, not easy to find on vinyl. I paid $12 for this, but I managed to get a nice clean copy. Really worth checking out. And I'm going to mention that, so he put out that album, then he put out this one. I think he did one more album, and then another kind of under the radar sleeper album. Surprise, this only came out on CD in the 90s. Another really solid, underrated album. I've really grown to appreciate Paul Simon. I think he's kind of gone under the radar since this album, but man, he's put out just a string of amazing albums. And yeah, these two are kind of, uh, you know, little bit under the radar, maybe underrated, but well worth checking out. I would highly recommend either of those albums. Lastly, I am a big classical fan, and classical's kind of weird. Sometimes you can find classical albums dirt cheap. Usually they're in really good shape. Classical listeners tended to take good care of their records. My local record store CD seller has a big classical section, and the store owner basically told me they don't necessarily make much money off of that. They tend to get big troves of classical from estate sales and things like that. But they know that there is an audience for it. People that like classical tend to really like classical, and they got a ton of it. And here's an example. I paid $3 for this old analog era early recording by the conductor Colin Davis before he became Sir Colin Davis of Dvorak Symphonic Variations, Serenade for Strings. Just a wonderful recording. I mean, I was very familiar with the Serenade, was not familiar with the Symphonic Variations. Just lovely. $3, and the vinyl is just pristine, so quiet. So if you're new to classical, there are bargains to be found. I hate to say it, but often you find classical at estate sales, although I don't really do that these days. I think it's kind of a waste of time. But yeah, if you're new to classical, check out some Dvorak. You might check out Colin Davis as the conductor. He pretty much can conduct any idiom, and he does it all really well. And a lot of his, yeah, and they tend to be really good recordings. So I've talked long enough. Those are some things I've been listening to and some heavy rotation. And y'all have happy January and happy MLK Day, everyone. Good night.